So many people actually accompany me in this particular perspective, and one clear case is the application to try to get data of almost anything and then try to make sense out of it. And we know, we interact with the computers, we enter in Google, we go to Facebook, and they are learning from you. And actually, when you do an information retrieval, what comes back in for example, in Google, is something is really very relevant to what you're looking. So there are ways of learning about not necessarily understanding, but of learning and predicting and classifying that does not require a theory that involves parameters or gene frequencies or linkage equilibrium, etc. And this is the area of machine learning. So this is a common statement in the US: if you cannot beat them, join them. So if you do not understand complex data, that doesn't mean that you have to give up. There may be methods that allow us to emulate how complex data behave without perhaps understanding very well why they do so. And these are many of the approaches that are used in machine learning, such as neural networks, universal approximators, kernel methods, non-parametric methods, support vector machine, random forests, and animal and plant breeders have actually done contributions to it without knowing. Galton, doing data mining, the groups that deal with sampling methods, in sampling, cross-validation in animal and plant breeding, kernel methods, Bayesian networks. Dr. Murata used a Bayesian network to study linkage equilibrium, for example. Methods that use meta methods like boosting, bagging, support vector machines, etc. So we have been doing methods without knowing, excuse me. And actually, best linear bias predictor, as I said before, is a linear neural network, which is considered to be a universal approximator. Another class of method is based on non-parametric regression. It's trying to find a function that is best in a Hilbert spaces of function, which is a very vast space of functions. These methods were actually developed. The idea of using this method came from our group. The first application was done in chickens by one of my postdoc, Oscar Gonzalez Recio from Spain. And Gota did also work with reproducing current Hilbert spaces regression. There are some recent papers in which they have used this idea to examine to what extent accommodating genotype environment interaction enhances prediction. So there is a paper by a couple of Italians that work in North Carolina State, and also by Diego Jarquin, that he was a colleague of Dr. Murata at the University of Nebraska, and it seems to give considerably better predictions in some cases for dairy animals, especially for young bulls. Now, with the question of that animal production is becoming less and less popular, and there is concern about environmental contamination, and especially in the case of ruminants, contribution of methane to global warming, there is a great deal of interest in learning about the interaction between your metagenome, all the bacteria and viruses live within you, and for that we don't have any theory whatsoever. So machine learning algorithms have been suggested as a way of trying to do something with it. The most recent generation of methods actually comes from the field of artificial intelligence. I don't know if you are familiar with this book writer called Dan Brown. He wrote some very popular books. These are fiction, the Da Vinci Code, Angel and Demons, Inferno. And this is a book, it's based on a plot to kill the King of Spain. And the central character in the book is a computer. It's called Winston, like Winston Churchill. And it uses a method called deep learning that you probably have heard about. So deep learning is something that it's not very new in science. and we have actually done a bit of deep learning without knowing it. This is it's a neural network. It's a mathematical representation of relationship between inputs and outputs, and in the middle you have some cells that do mathematical operations that are called neurons, and the deep learners are just neural networks with several layers like this, multiple layered neural networks. But there is a new class of algorithms that have been suggested that similarly are very good for doing many things, like image analysis, consumer choice. For instance, when you try to buy a TV, and you go to a search machine and you specify things that normally a good choice will be made for you. So these are the deep learners, and the question came that, well, maybe we should abandon all the methods that we are using for predicting performance in animals and humans and move to deep learning. So let's see what evidence do we have that deep learners can help us in artificial breeding of animal and plants. There have been many studies, but I'm going to concentrate on some ones, and these are not terribly biased to show the negative performance of deep learning. This is a paper from Indonesia. They look at 8 maize traits, their flowering, gray yield, etc., and they compare 4 methods: best linear bias prediction, a Bayesian method called the Bayesian lasso, this non-parametric method called reproducing kernel Hilbert spaces regression, and this is a deep learner. It's called a deep belief network. These are correlations, so the larger the better, the closer they get to 1 the better, and observe that in the 8 comparisons, deep learning was better only in 2 out of the 8 comparisons, and perhaps not significantly better, because for instance, if you compare this number with this number, it's a difference in the 3rd decimal level. The same happens here, but in 5 out of the 8 comparisons, the deep learner was the worst. Okay? And if you listen to what comes in the newspapers all the day and what the computer scientists tell you, we should move into deep learning. Well, according to the paper, not yet. So then a study in which I was more an instigator than a significant contributor, they compared deep learning, which is the red, with GBLUP for several wheat traits. So there are 9 data sets, including data from Iran. This is a situation in which the deep learner was always worse than GBLUP, not only in Mexico, but also in Iran. Now, here there is another class of models. Here there was interaction, including the model, which is important in plant breeding. But if you omitted interaction, then there were a few instances in which deep learner was better than GBLUP. But there are many more instances in which that was not the case. So we cannot conclude that we should replace our battery of methods by deep learners. And every prediction problem is unique. So it's difficult to come up with universal recommendation. This is another study by the same group, but now you see multi-trait, multi-environment deep learning models. And again, these are 2 Bayesian methods. These are 2 deep learners. Observe that there is really not any clear, for example, with Iranian data, the deep learner were much worse than the parametric methods, and there are really no clear differences at all in favor of deep learner. The same has been found with humans. This is stature in humans. The pink and the magenta are the deep learners. The green ones are standard multi-layer perceptrons that are neural networks, but without using the convolutional neural network algorithm. And the first 2, the gray and the black, are base B, which is a linear regression, and this is genomic plot. So for stature, no evidence that deep learning was better, but for bone hill mineral density, this is in humans, the deep learners were sometimes a total disaster. like here. See, these are different ways of fitting SNPs in the model. So we don't have any evidence that deep learning is always the best, and actually we do have evidence that they can be very unstable. Whether that is the result of that they have done things wrong, or maybe that everybody uses the same software, is a matter to be decided. But as of today, we do not have any clear evidence of the role that deep learning could play in animal and plant breeding. Well, I am reaching the conclusion. I'm sorry it has taken me more than an hour. So if we look at retrospectively to this historical narrative, and I have to say, like when you read history, the narrative is typically very personal and very biased. This is a personal narrative of history. Perhaps if you had taken somebody else of my age and my experience, the history would have been different. But this is the history as I view it, okay? I think it is fair to say that animal breeders have incorporated the statistical idea very rapidly. You know, deep learning came up and it was tried right away. They have also contributed to statistics as well by contributing methods such as BLUP, REML, Bayesian modeling, Bayesian linear regression, genome-enabled prediction. Something that we do know very well is that inference and prediction are very different. They are connected, but not the same thing. So sometimes if you learn the state of the world too well, and you understand everything, but the model is very, very complicated, the prediction may be very poor, because the parameter of the model cannot be estimated effectively. I think it's fair to say that the emphasis in GWAS, which is really excessive, there are tens of thousands of papers in GWAS, that many of these will be GWAShed away simply because the standard GWAS model is a very poor description of complexity. So you cannot, when you estimate a single regression coefficient, and there are many other variables that have been ignored in the model, the results are bound to be biased and are bound to be misleading. What about, here there is a mistake in the slide. These two statements should have been separate. Kernel-based methods have been found quite useful in prediction. Actually, if I had to choose between a deep learner and a kernel method to predict something, I would probably try first a kernel method because I think it will be more stable. Systems approaches, well, there is always this big discussion that these nice systems approaches can be used with small systems with experimental organisms such as Drosophila or Arabidopsis or Caenorhabditis. But then when you extrapolate, you have to remember that pigs do not fly yet. Not even cars fly yet. So there are challenges to parametric methods posed by this massive amount of information. So many groups in animal and plant production are moving to other ways of exploiting massive data and also other ways of looking at how you use this massive data to come up with predictions. And Dr. Morota is one of the pioneers of these new generations. So an example where this may be useful is what's called genetic metagenomics. So it's what we talk about metagenomics and like to learn, for example, the composition of microbiota, but there may be genetic variability for composition of microbiota. So then we have two layers, the genetic layer and the metagenomic layer. How to put that together in a model is something that is a topic for investigation. So are we moving in a direction where everything will be semi-parametric, data guided, and machine learning? I do not know. I truly do not know. But I'll just finish with the following comment. A couple of years ago, the famous British magazine, The Economist, said that the dairy farm of the future will just have two employees, a man and a dog. And the job of the dog will be to chase out people that come to touch the robots. Okay, so if you touch the robot, the dog will come and bite you and chase you away. And the role of the man will be to feed the dog. Okay, so we may be moving in that direction, which will change the landscape as we know, but I don't know to what extent this is an unavoidable matter. Well, I have reached the conclusion. I would like to thank you for your attention. I'm sorry that I went over time. I tend to indulge into digressions, and today was not an exception. I would like again thank Dr. Nokoi, right? And Dr. Miyake for the invitation to come to Kyoto. It has been a real pleasure, both for my wife and I, to be in Japan. We have found you people extremely hospitable and courteous, and it is just our inability of learning Japanese that puts us in trouble, because everybody comes and tries to help us as best as we can. So thank you very much to all. Arigatou gozaimasu.